Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to be here in Lethbridge. And so just to give a brief background myself, I've been in HR for several years. And the first 10 years of my HR career, I spent a lot of time actually in this area. So I'm going to be sharing, some of those experiences today and love to hear some of your experience as well. But I like to start off with hearing a little bit about you as well. It's a small group. So if we could do some quick introductions, say just name, maybe the role you're in right now, the company you're with, and as well what you're hoping to learn today, get out of the session today. Because I like to jot down some participant objectives. So at the end of the session, we can go over and make sure we've covered everything that you were hoping to discuss. So do you mind starting with intro? Yeah.
Sure, I'm Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
you.
Jessica.
Wait.
Is it on?
Jessica. Jessica.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect. It's a trick mic.
Yeah, that's right.
I like it. So my name is Jessica. I manage Purely Inspired Academy of Beauty, and I'm with One Beauty Brands. I've been in the role for 7 years, and I've got a background in marketing and management and HR. But I don't do hair, and I don't do anything beauty wise. So I give kudos to the students all the time. My main thing, I've had the same team for most of them for the last 7 years.
Okay.
And I think the hardest thing for me is as you gain more close personal relationships, how to continue to keep that. There's still a good, respect level there, but how to keep that mindset of managing, especially when you form closer relationships.
Right.
So that's my big thing.
And I'm Nicole. I'm an HR manager at a cattle company, Casco. And I've been there just coming up on 3 years. And I guess I'm just here to learn some new ideas and see what everyone else does with disciplinary things. That's about it.
Thank you, Nicole.
I'm Sarah, and I work at Lethbridge College. And role, I guess the role is HR generalist, but typically I'm doing the majority of the recruiting for staff, not anything on the student end. But yeah.
Okay, very good. And what were you hoping to get out of today? Is it
Whatever I can.
just learn some new ideas too?
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
sure.
sounds good. Good, thank you.
My name is Lance. I'm one of the co-owners of AirTech Heating. I also manage the service department. I guess what I'm looking for is just how to deal with and to, when you're in a smaller organization, you do develop those relationships, and it's very difficult to reprimand or to try to change a behavior without hurting the feelings. So that's my hope, is that I can get some tools, and I don't have a background in HR and things like that. So anything I can glean from today would be wonderful.
Great, thank you.
Hello, my name is Jared Hare. I am the shop foreman at AirTech. I am basically dealing with the same problems everybody else is. Some of these employees have become my friends, and it is kind of hard for them to, again, I guess, get that I'm the boss. And when you give out discipline, I'm not sure if it's even taken seriously, because it's like, well, you're just saying that to keep the bosses happy. Maybe you'll turn your head the other way as soon as they're gone. But yeah, it's like I said, or everybody else is saying, without hurting people's feelings. What are the tools and kind of techniques that we can use? That's about it.
Very good, thank you.
I'm Dwayne Huber. I'm also with AirTech, president and co-owner as well. Looking for ideas on how we can get a more inspiring culture, and how do we use the carrot as opposed to the stick and create that. I always find my best ideas have always been somebody else's. By going to these seminars, I've yet to go to one that I knew it all already. So there's usually some gem that you get out of it.
Great, thank you.
I'm Miriam. I'm with the Davis Automotive Group as an HR generalist. I've been there for a total of 7 months, so I'm fairly new. So I definitely say tools to kind of pass on to the managers. In our role, we're kind of partners with the managers, so we don't really make those disciplinary actions or decisions. So I'd say give tools to those managers who don't have the HR background to help them make better decisions.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm Trish. I'm with Northview Apartment REIT. I'm not in the HR capacity at all, but I came out here from Calgary about 6 months ago where I was doing accounts payable. Now I'm doing they call it customer care coordinator. So it's customer service. So I'm also shadowing my boss because I would like to be a regional manager eventually. So she's given me the tools and the opportunities to come and learn and grow into my future position.
Very good.
I'm Deanna. I'm the HR coordinator at Bigelow Fowler Clinics here in Lethbridge. So I've worked in HR for the last 10 years actually, with Alberta Health Services. However, I just moved to the clinic about 1.5 years ago. And so what I'm hoping to learn is because I'm kind of new to them. They've never had HR before. So we're starting here. And I guess for me, I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum is trying to gain their trust and trying to, the saying, an old dog can't you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah. That's kind of where we're at. So what I'm hoping to gain today is kind of how can we get the trust that we need to start building these tools.
Very good. Great.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Maxwell. I'm the CEO of the Real Estate Board, and I have a small staff. But what I'm looking for today is setting up a good evaluation and the key performance indicators that would go along with that.
Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. Well, great group. Like I love, varied from different industries and businesses. It's wonderful. Some with HR backgrounds, some without. But that's, this is going to be a general overview in 3 hours. And we got 2 really meaty topics, actually 3, because we've combined investigations and terminations. So, 3 really big topics that we can't get too deep into today. My goal is to give enough information, have some good dialogue, do some case studies so you have an opportunity within small groups to talk through some of these scenarios as well. So you could see how would I really apply this? And although, I will do my best to touch upon each of these areas, like setting up a good evaluation. Well, I'm actually going to start, that's performance management. We could do a whole session just on that as well. But that's where I'm going to start because I know this is about managing employee discipline. But you can't manage discipline unless you first set up clear expectations, and then you can hold people accountable. So that's where I want to start. I'm not going to jump right into managing discipline because that comes if everything else doesn't work, right? It's a last resort. And yeah, when you're small, close-knit, I've seen several businesses as you grow, you've developed this family culture, right? And it's worked so well. But as you grow and more people, you have to have some rules. Otherwise, things do go a little crazy without having some structure in place, right? And with that comes some code of conduct. This is the way we want people to behave and show up in front of customers. And if employees aren't doing that, then there's the accountability piece. So that's what we're going to touch on today. But that's great. Thank you for sharing all those objectives. Okay, so we've gone over the objectives. Just quickly, the agenda. So I am going to start on performance expectations and accountability. And then we'll talk about basic principles of discipline and the process itself, which is called progressive discipline. And then we're going to do a case study. So my goal is to talk for, actually, is there a clock somewhere in here? I'm going to be looking at my phone to see what time it is. And I forgot to start this on. Just want to see the timing here. So where's Chris? So he's over there. Or maybe you can be my timekeeper. Just give me a heads up when I'm for sure 9:40, say. I want to be sort of getting close to the case study. I want to make sure you have enough time. And like Chris said, we'll take a break just around 10. Like when you're doing the case study, you'll be in small groups, and that's where we'll call that the break if that's okay, because I know we just have 3 solid hours. So when you're working on the case study, you can go out and reset the timing for the parking and the washrooms if they're around the corner here. Help yourself to some snacks, and we'll do that during the break. So that's sort of what the first session. We'll have a case study for the first one, and then we'll get into the second topic, which I'll lecture for a bit, and then again another case study to apply some of the concepts that we're talking about. Okay, so like I said, managing discipline, it has to start with performance management, really. And that is about setting clear expectations. If you don't set clear expectations with your employees, how can you hold someone accountable if they don't clearly know what they're supposed to do and what success looks like? That's really what. So how many of you have a performance review process where you do performance reviews? Can everybody put their hand? Okay, that's excellent. Good. And do you do it? But yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. Well, at least you have one. Some people don't, right? I have clients that they're still just thinking about it, as they grow. Well, maybe we should do something like that. So you set performance objectives at the beginning of the year, correct? Do you do a mid-year review? Some, half and half maybe, so mid-year, no? Okay. That's good. Okay, so mid-year, and how does that go? Is it consistent? Is it tough to get everybody to do it? That's always a struggle, right? Everybody's busy, and it's tough to find the time. But that's great that he's keep fighting that good battle, because it's tough. Again, if you set objectives and then if you only talk with people at the end of the year about the objectives, well, how can they really improve or know the areas? Hopefully that's not happening. It's not just once a year. Hopefully there's check-ins, maybe even monthly, bi-weekly. Some people have check-ins with their managers, and you actually take out the goals and review them and talk about how the progress is going, what barriers do you have. That's all performance management. And the bigger companies that I've worked, like Pepsi was great at that. We were actually working at Pepsi as a manager. You had to have at a minimum every 2 weeks, you had to have a one-with-one, we call them, with all your direct reports. And it wasn't just to go over the performance review. You would look at the goals and how they're going. It was more, a check-in to see how things are going, where can the manager offer support where needed, and that sort of thing. But that was ongoing. So when it came to the mid-year and the end of the year, there weren't any surprises about how someone was doing, because that dialogue continued, throughout the year. So, if this is another way to set expectations. So there's performance review, and then there's code of conduct. So how many of the companies you work for have a code of conduct, an employee code of conduct? Okay, a few. So as you grow, and I have an example to share for the smaller companies that are just starting to look at this area, but I feel like that's so important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going over that in a little bit more detail. But that really sets the behavioral expectations for your employees, what's expected. And that can be the basis of, it might lead to some discipline if they're not following those code of conducts. But they have to know about them, so it has to be communicated on an ongoing basis. So not just once and then put the paper away. It has to be at least annually reviewed. And so we'll talk, like I said, a little bit more about that. So that's great. Once you set up the expectations, then you can hold people accountable. And that's all these checkpoints that we've mentioned, like mid-year reviews. If you talk with your employees monthly, bi-weekly, whatever, that puts that accountability into place. So first, code of conduct. Just talk about that a little bit more. It really establishes what's expected of employees in a formal document, and so that there are no surprises and this should be made very clear when you're hiring someone. It should be part of the hiring package, right? It should be part of the onboarding, the orientation, that you take them through the code of conduct. And most companies, there's an acknowledgement. So there should be a page, or it might be online. Like, some of these code of conducts are very sophisticated. In fact, I think it was at the next. I have a link that you can see some of the best code of conduct examples. So Google, for instance, is one, and that one's actually quite readable. Now, if you're a small company, you can't have a code of conduct like Google, but you can certainly you can take some ideas from there and start with a one-pager with how. And I will hand out one in a minute here of what a sample one-pager would look like. but important to communicate and follow up, make sure that it's very clear of what's expected. And most companies do an annual acknowledgement. It might be, at Pepsi, it was online training every year to go through this online training, refresh on the code of conduct, and then you signed that you acknowledged that you reviewed it, you understand it. If you didn't understand it, your leader was there to help understand it, explain it to you better. So with a smaller company, it could be something, just sign off. It could be an email signature saying, I acknowledge, I have, please reply to this email that you acknowledge that you've read and understand the code of conduct and what's expected. It can be that simple. But that's really important to have that, because then you can hold people accountable if they don't follow the code of conduct. So what are some things that you think should be included in a code of conduct? Or if you have a code of conduct, what are some examples, some things that are in the document? You think of it? That's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like if you start a business outside of work, is there a conflict with your job, with the organization? Yeah. Anything else? Dress code's a good one. Yeah, that's a tough one to deal with sometimes, depending on the nature of the business. Yeah, that's a good one. Privacy. Yeah, that's big now, right? Confidentiality and privacy. That's something that necessarily years ago wasn't in there, but really has to be. There's whole policies on confidentiality and privacy now. Those are some good ones. Any others? Very good. Respect, how we treat each other. Yeah, great examples. So if you are going to be starting just from scratch, creating your own code of conduct, my advice is just keep it simple at the beginning. And it's on that flash stick that you got as well, an example that you could lift a lot of that off and start with that. But a lot of times a code of conduct, it'll have the purpose. Where's Chris? Where's my help here? Do you mind handing out the first handout, Chris? We made a copy for you as well, just in case you want to refer to it while we're talking, and if you want to make any notes. But there's just an example. And this is just one example. Like I said, there's many, many different examples on the internet. If you just search up code of conduct, you can get a lot of, and this is the link that I was talking about, if you wanted some of the best company code of conduct examples. So Google's one of the best, according to this article, Starbucks, Pepsi. So these are big companies, but again, you could just take ideas if you're creating your own. Take some of the verbiage ideas from, they're there to be looked at as a resource. So, but as you can see from the example there, you've got your company purpose can be part of the code of conduct. Your values, that's an important one, because you want your employees to uphold your values as a company. And then it's important to have what you expect and what the consequences could be. So in the example, somewhere it reads that, under the company values, that failure to adhere to these values and principles may result in disciplinary action. You put that right in there so there's no, people understand, the employees understand what could happen. So, and what questions do you have about code of conduct before we move on? Does that make sense? Okay. I know it's tough when you're a small, you've always been a family knit. You don't want to, come in strong, making all these rules at the beginning, but this is kind of a good, if you just start with a one-pager summarizing the conduct that you expect of your employees and roll that out in a positive way, it's a great place to start. So, all right, so I wanted to share, and there's a lot of detail. I put all these detail on the slide so you can use this. Like, to your point, you can give it to someone else who hasn't been here as well. I'm not going to read through all the details here, but I wanted this to be a resource for you to take away after the session. So I wanted to just share a little bit on how do we set and enforce company rules. And this has actually been established in case law. And that's the other point I want to say. I'm not a lawyer. I forgot to say at the beginning. I've taken enough law courses just to make myself, dangerous in the area. But working in labor relations for years, I learned something about the laws, but I am not a lawyer. So when it comes to very complicated, bigger issues where you may have to, it's a big, suspension maybe that might have to occur, or termination. I really do advise it's best to consult with a legal advisor. And if your company, if you're big enough that you have one in-house, that's what for the big companies, but you're smaller, you don't, still find a good lawyer that you can call. It's worth your while, before you do have to terminate someone, or even, a major suspension or something, because every situation is different, right? This is not clear cut. This is very, there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. So that's why I just want to step through some of the principles behind some of these concepts so that you can see, okay, so I got to think about some of these things as an issue comes up. So when you're setting rules, so first of all, they can't be contrary to any other rules that you already have in place. So that makes sense, right? If there's a collective agreement that you're working with, you can't establish a rule that goes against a rule that's already there, or a law. You can't have something that's less than employment standards or the Human Rights Act, like nothing like that. So you have to make sure you're consistent and it doesn't go below, obviously, or contrary to anything that already exists. They have to be reasonable, of course. You can't ask someone to do unreasonable tasks. And they have to be clear. So clear expectations, I say that a lot. And consistency is another big one that I say a lot. That's skipping to the bottom. But consistency is really so important that you can't suspend someone for something and then a couple months later just let someone off with a brief little talk. Once employees start seeing that, that's going to cause a lot of problems. So these are all just rules that are good kind of checkpoints as you start developing different rules, or your different situations come up where you may have to discipline someone. And then, so I've talked about performance management, and this is where some people get confused. What's the difference between discipline and performance management? And they do work together. That's why it can be confusing. But think of performance management is different. It's proactive, and it's what you're establishing to let people know what's expected of them, giving them feedback on an ongoing basis. Now, discipline can come from performance management, though. I mean, performance management, you want people to be successful. You want your employees to be successful generally, right? You don't want them to fail. So once you set up these goals for them, you review them with them often enough so they understand what's expected. Now, sometimes performance will fall short, though, right? Employees, so there's a difference. There could be where performance is falling short and the employee is really trying. They're trying their best. And it's a skill level or something with training that's causing their performance to be lacking. Then that's non-culpable, right? So there's some legal terms again. There's culpable if they, their performance is lacking, or there's a misconduct that happens, something they do is a form of misconduct. Culpable means that it's more about the behavior, the attitude versus the skill. So does that make sense? Like with performance management, a lot of times it might be training, lack of training, or some things weren't explained well enough, and then you work through that. You train, and then they want to improve, and there's some employees that don't want to improve, or they might do something deliberately. So that's where discipline comes into play. Discipline, if you continue to train someone and their performance continues to lack, well, discipline could happen then as well. But where it happens more immediately is where it's culpable, where it's something that they choose not to do. Could someone read this quote for me? Would anyone mind reading that? That's exactly it. As an HR person, how many times do you have that conversation, right? Around, 8 times a day. Yeah, because jumping to discipline is sort of, let's just, we got to discipline this guy. He's not doing his job. This person's not doing their job. But no, have you clearly, and that's where I started there. You need to clearly define the expectations. Is it clear to them? Do they understand? Do they have the right training? And if all those are a yes, then maybe discipline is the right route, but not to jump right into it. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough not to. Performance, and I'll say, well, show me that you've made your efforts to improve his performance. Like
listed out what you've done already, and then you can make a decision if discipline is necessary, because sometimes they haven't taken their step. They haven't done their part as the manager either.
Exactly. And I love that. Show me. Like, actually coach the managers to take notes when you have conversations. Doesn't mean the notes go on their employee file. Most managers should have their own files for their employees. And even if you recognize them for doing something great, make a little note, throw it in there, not just the stuff where their performance is lacking. Because then when it comes time for performance review time or mid-year review, you don't have to remember. You can go to that file and, okay, I remember they did this. But then, they have proof that, look, I had a conversation regarding attendance a month ago. And, and then so if they can actually show you, that's the strongest, not just say, well, yeah, we kind of briefly talked about this. I think we did, or, in passing. So no, that's good. So more on the principles of discipline. And discipline, it really is it's a corrective measure, right? It's corrective, not punitive. So the goal again is for the employee to improve. If something's happened and they violated the code of conduct, and now we're going to talk a bit more. There's very severe cases which sometimes go right to termination. But if it's less severe and it's something that can be improved upon, it really is meant to be corrective in nature. And when we say progressive, so we're going to talk about the general steps in progressive discipline. Normally, discipline is progressive. Again, there's exceptions, very severe cases where it's not progressive. You go straight to termination. So we'll talk about that as well. And I said this so many, times. That's why these are my quotes. Consistency is key. You need to be consistent in these areas. And, in HR, I think that's one area that I think there needs to be processes and procedures, because it's only fair. Otherwise, it's not viewed as fair. And if you're not fair, employees aren't going to trust you. And that goes right to the culture and how engaged your workforce is. And, we talk about a more inspiring culture. Well, this will help the culture being, at first they might see, more rules. But once they see, no, we want to be fair and consistent, and as a whole organization. And that's why we have to incorporate some of these new measures, the code of conduct, and set clear expectations and so forth. And then another one, timeliness. Discipline delayed is discipline denied. I always, a manager would come up and say, so a month ago, this guy did that. Really? Well, too late. You can't say a month ago that discipline delayed, it's discipline denied. That's all. It has to be addressed in a prompt manner. Otherwise, it wouldn't stand in a court. Like, that's what you think about. If you always have to think, is the discipline appropriate? Would it be viewed as appropriate in the legal world, right? Because if someone is terminated or for cause, then they can take that to a lawyer and fight it. So that's what you have to think of as well. So we've talked about a lot of these already. But when there's a potential, and we're going to get into all the facts being gathered, so we're going to talk about investigations, right? How you would handle an investigation for a form of misconduct in the workplace. So that'll be the second topic we're going to cover today. So I don't want to get into a lot of that. Just and timely, we talked about all these, but those are, again, just some checkpoints to look at when discipline is effective. One thing I haven't, just cause. So you must have just cause. Does anybody know what just cause means? Definition of just cause? It means just what I was mentioning, that like you have legally sufficient grounds for disciplining someone. So it's not arbitrary. And this is, again, where your past practice, your consistency comes in. And that's important too. Yeah, this is not black and white, right? This is, and this next kind of, so this goes over some of the questions you can ask yourself. So if, as you're going through and investigating and contemplating, trying to figure out what should be done in every case, here's some questions you could ask yourself. So I'm just going to start with maybe the first and the last. So was the employee aware that the behavior could result in disciplinary action? So that's what we talked about. As long as, yes, if you've reviewed the code of conduct, the expectations have been made clear, but you really have to be able to prove that, right? That yes, you have made those, taken those steps. And like you said, you ask that question of managers several times a day because that's so important. You need to start there. Otherwise, you just can't jump to discipline. And then the bottom, I'm going to skip to the bottom. Are there any mitigating or aggravated factors that should be considered? Again, kind of legal terms, but mitigating would be when you're looking at the overall, maybe you're thinking about a suspension for what's happened. So do they have a good work record? Is this out of their character? I mean, those are some mitigating factors that might help lessen the penalty. Then there's aggravated factors that, if the person just has such a bad attitude, said that they meant to do it, like no remorse, bad work record, all those things, you're going to stick with the original, suspension and not look at any concessions because, that's person isn't wanting to do better. Again, back to the beginning, there's a difference between an employee who wants to do better and those that don't. So those are all questions that you can ask yourself when you're determining if the level of discipline is appropriate for the action. So before we go to the next slide, so what are some situations or some actions that would warrant discipline that you've either dealt with or that you can think of? Actions on behalf of an employee that would warrant discipline. Any examples? That's a big one, right? So that's one of the more serious ones, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's like insubordination, going against with the manager. As long as it's legal within the employee's, job description, manager has a right to assign work. Yeah, good. Any other examples? We'll go through a few here. So this is not an all-inclusive list. It's just a list of some of the factors that, so theft, that's a big one that we covered a few, the very first ones, insubordination, harassment in the workplace. That's, has to be taken very seriously. Code of conduct violations. So anything that you put in your code of conduct that's reasonable, that's, that you want people to follow. Falsification of qualifications. Has anybody ever had that? I've had people that, say they have a degree and you find out they don't, or that kind of thing. I've had a person, several times though, but falsified doctor's notes. That's really serious too, right? Yeah, I had one guy, years ago, he took his wife's doctor's note and white out her name and put his name. And when we called the office, it was a gynecologist. So, yeah, I fired him for that. That's Yeah.
It just looked, you just have that feeling, right? Like this doesn't seem right, so you end up trying to find this clinic. It didn't even exist.
Didn't even exist. Wow. Yeah, and it's tricky now because with privacy and confidentiality, like I don't know how much a clinic would even information they give you over the phone, right? Yeah. Like even just to confirm is this a patient of yours, that's, I don't know that they could even give that out. So it's a bit trickier. So I haven't had to deal with that for a few years, but yeah, you can, they're tough things to catch, right? But usually if that's happening, there's other issues going on as well. Like this person had a big attendance issue. Attendance was really the issue that this individual in that case was going to get fired for. Just happened to be falsifying a doctor's note. So attendance issues, and that's why I love this when I found this. It's a panel discussion about absenteeism in the workplace, and one person shows up. I thought that was good. Violation of safety rules. I mean, that's another big one. And reporting to work in an unfit condition. Like, how complicated is that getting now with the new laws, right? New cannabis laws. It's so important. You have to report to work in a fit condition. Otherwise, you're putting yourself or others in potential harm's way. So, these are all complicated areas that could definitely, result in discipline. I wanted to share, this was a few months ago, I found this CBC News article. It was talking about discipline with the Canada Revenue Agency. And I loved it. Said the headline said more than 1,000 CRA employees disciplined for misconduct over the past 4 years. So if you just look at that headline, 1,000 Canada Revenue Agency employees disciplined. Well, then you have to put into perspective. There's actually 44,000 employees, it says, that work for Canada Revenue Agency. So it's about 2% of the workforce, which, still that's a lot of discipline. I can't imagine being HR there. That's all you would deal with. And the top reason for it said in the article was Canadian taxpayer information, like compromising, like some of the information, so not protecting our information. So that's pretty scary. But the point of the article, like, I guess you could look at it from different perspectives. You could say, gee, what are they doing? Why aren't they, taking charge and setting, guidelines in place and making sure these things don't happen? Well, I guess they hit a point, though, that maybe they realized something needs to be done. So they were starting to deal with it. So that's the positive coming out of this. That's how I read it as an HR person. Well, they're getting tougher on these issues, and they're putting actually different, what would they say, that they're improving the ability to, like, stronger detection technology so that they can detect if someone goes into a tax return or information where they had no business going into there, that wasn't part of their portfolio, or, they put in measures, and they can do that with technology now. So it was getting a bit easier to find these situations, and they were dealing with it. And there was actually a spokesperson, even the union was talking about, we realized that the company, they let us know. And see, that's the thing. If you've got a union, my policy was always communicate, like, have these conversations up front. You don't want this to be a surprise. If you're going to clamp down on discipline, say, have a meeting with the union. Let employees know. Send out a memo saying, we're going to start looking at these matters more seriously and train them again on the code of conduct, do whatever you have to do. But communication is the best way to get around this, because then once you do start disciplining, it's not a surprise. Those employees that are want to be good, then they will stay that way. And the ones that choose otherwise, well, they were put on notice that this could happen. So I just thought that was really interesting, those, if you just looked at the headline, the title of the article, you'd be appalled at how many people were being disciplined. But I mean, it was a good thing. They were actually taking issue with the discipline. How am I doing for time there, Chris? 40. Oh, okay. We're gonna go through this. Can you help me with another handout, please? Another. So we've talked about these. I just want to go over the 4 steps quickly, because that's what, when we go into the case study, we're going to be, looking at how you would administer discipline, or if you should even discipline in the scenario. Yes. So verbal warning, Chris is handing out an example of a written warning. And again, this is from my experience and just some examples that I kind of compiled. This is not exact wording that, you could change it. You could review it with your lawyer the first time you do this. But I wanted to just give you some examples so you could see some of the information. Some people don't like to put any details in a written warning. I mean, a written warning, so a verbal might be a first step. So say it's attendance is the issue. This attendance is something normally you use progressive discipline. Theft, if it's serious enough. Someone once tried to steal an engine from an engine plant. That's pretty big. So that's, that could go to termination right away. But attendance normally, if the person's above the average, and attendance is really tough, right? That's a tough one to work through. But you might have a verbal discussion then, first step. And that's called a verbal warning. And you don't put anything on their file at that point normally. But as a manager, you make notes and you keep those in your file. That on this day, you had this conversation about attendance. This is what was discussed. The expectations were clearly explained again. So you clearly explain the expectations, what the infraction is, and that any future infractions will result in progressive discipline up to and including termination. So these are all things that are in the example that you could, but at the verbal warning, nothing's on the file. When you go to written warning, that's when you do place something on employee's file. And then suspension as well. Different places, again, you can have, I've worked when I worked at Ford, I'm trying to remember, there was 1-day suspension, 3-day suspension, 5-day suspension. There were different levels of suspensions. So you can decide what you want to do. And it really depends, again, on the situation. If it's serious enough, you might skip a few. Again, if you just, every situation is different. It's the severity and what feels right and what's consistent. And that's what, if one infraction is much more serious than what happened a month ago with another employee, you could skip to a 5-day suspension. But again, this is a letter that's put on the employee's file. Now, does anybody know or how long you would keep it on file? Let's see if, do you know, would it be a year? Is it? Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, if there's a collective agreement, absolutely. So you need to follow that. If you don't have a collective agreement, though, I think normally a year is what, like for written warning, for example. If you give someone a written warning for attendance, and if they're good for a year and then nothing's happened, you wouldn't build on that normally, right? Because they've obviously, they've been good and then maybe something's happened in their life that's caused this again. And that's the thing, there could be personal reasons. All of this requires investigation, which we're gonna talk about more in the second topic. That's right, exactly. So even if you physically forget to take it off the file, you couldn't build on it over a year. And that's reasonable, right? That makes sense. The person's been good for a year. They deserve not to have it built upon. Yeah. So termination, I'm not going to get into it here yet because we're going to cover that in the next. So just to summarize, so the most important aspects of delivering discipline: clear communication, check for understanding, make sure the person understands, again, the infraction, the reason that the consequences are happening, and what they need to be successful going forward, and if there's any further infractions, what can happen. So all those things, just to make sure it's really clear. And that's why if you put it in the letter, you follow up with the letter as well. You've had the conversation, you've documented it, you've shared it with them. You're covering all the bases for communication. So document. You can't, as managers, as HR, I always walked around with my book, my little black book, right? And, you're taking notes because it's so important to remember the facts of when certain things occurred. And
if the employee refuses to sign, you can just make a note at the bottom and say,
refuse to sign. Because what I always used to explain is, listen, signing this is just acknowledging that I've reviewed it with you. Because some employees are adamant, this is wrong, I shouldn't, they're not kind of taking accountability for their actions, or they feel that it's too severe. Yeah, that definitely happens. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Chris, you don't mind helping me here? Because I got 2 handouts now. Hopefully we double-sided the case study because we got 2 scenarios. But if you don't mind handing out the key takeaways, we're going to just do a short little quiz before we go to the case study. Yeah. Oh, we're... Yeah. No, we're going to do this as a group. Where's my notes? And then Chris, while we're working on the quiz, if you don't mind handing that out too. So, okay, so let's do this quiz together. There's just a few boxes here. So principles of discipline include, what are some of the principles of discipline that we talked about? Can you remember any of the principles? Discipline should be what? Not punitive. Corrective. That's right. Very good. So yeah, discipline should be corrective, not punitive. It should be, what did we just talk about normally? Progressive. Thank you. Very good. And then a few other like general principles. I use consistent. I use that word a lot. Yeah, consistent and fair. To me, consistency and fairness kind of go hand in hand. And what else? Starts with a T. Timeliness. Very good. Should be timely. And on the right-hand side of the box there, so what are the 4 steps in progressive discipline that we just talked about? First step. Verbal. Very good. Second one? Written warning. Yeah. Third one? Suspension. And again, there could be different levels of suspensions there, and the 4th and final? Termination. Good. And then the last box there, deciding what level of discipline is appropriate. We're going to fill in the blanks here. So blank of the misconduct. And you're deciding what level of discipline is appropriate. Severity, very good. Yeah, severity of the misconduct. And then something of the infraction. Starts with an F. Frequency, very good. Frequency of the infraction. So this one's a mitigating factor. Could be a mitigating factor, or it could be a non-mitigating factor. The something of the work record. Previous work record or employee's work record. But previous work record. Sorry, so you could either of those work. Very good. And then you would also take into consideration past performance or past practice. So that's more about how the company has handled the similar types of infractions. And then there's mitigating and what's the opposite of mitigating? Aggravated, factors. Very good. And you can choose, you can either fill this out now or after you've done the case study, but one key takeaway from the session. So, one key takeaway, if you can just think of one aha or something that, okay, that made sense. I need to make sure that I follow up and do that or check on that. If you could, fill that little section out for yourself personally, and that could be your own little accountability from the training on what you want to incorporate into your work from what you learned today. But you're going to learn more with this case study now. So I think it's just about, so after we go through, we're going to read the scenarios together. You're going to have about half an hour to work on it. Yeah. And then I want to take about, make sure we have about 10, 15 minutes at the end to discuss it as a group. But once we break into the groups, and so what's our numbers like again? 3? So 3, and 4. Is that? I like to have more than just groups of. We got 10 of 10, right? Did I count right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So, and you know what? Should we? Yeah. You know what? What's that? Should we split you up? And we can go either way. I mean, it's kind of good to be but it's good to hear other perspectives too, right? So yeah, maybe if you're with your coworkers, maybe if you could split up into. Yeah. Do you mind? Yeah. And then maybe one of you, if you don't mind, coming over here. So we'll make a group of 4 here, and then 2 groups of 3. But we should split you 2 up too, right? So if one of you doesn't mind coming over to the other group, maybe just switching. Just trying to split up the coworkers. Yeah, thank you. So we've got 2 scenarios. Do you want me to read the scenario, or does someone else want to read scenario number 1? Tired of listening to me, or? Thank you. So in that scenario, so within your groups, I want you to discuss how you'd handle this situation. So you put yourself in the manager's role. You're the manager of the finance department. And ask yourself the following questions. What questions should you ask yourself about how the situation should be handled? So that's about, what steps you'll take to, what are some of the things that you're going to do as a manager to handle this situation? So that's kind of your planning part. And then secondly, what are some questions that you'd like to ask Susan when you meet with her? So assuming that's going to be one of your steps, you're obviously going to meet with Susan to discuss this, discuss her performance. What are some of the questions you might ask her? And then at the end of all that, would discipline be a potential outcome in this scenario? And, this is just a short scenario. You can add little facts but from the questions you ask, or do you think discipline could be something that would happen here? Okay, so that's the first scenario. Second scenario. Why don't we just read them both now, and then you guys can go off and work on it. And I'll be walking around if you have any questions. But would someone mind on the back side of that sheet reading the second scenario out loud to the group? Great, thank you. So how are you going to handle that situation? So again, what will you say to Tom when you approach him? This is immediate. You don't have time for planning here. You're approaching him right there. What are you going to say? And what are some of the questions that you'll ask him? And do you think discipline could be a potential outcome in this scenario? All right. So we'll start up again with we'll do a quick debrief of the 2 case studies, and then we'll move on to our next topic. So scenario number 1. So if I could ask for a spokesperson, sorry, from each group, so that you could just, as I ask the questions, if you want to just add some of, the discussion points that you talked about. So the first one, so what are some questions that you'd ask yourself about the situation and how it should be handled? So planning the conversation with Susan. What are some questions you'd ask yourself? Yeah, sure.
So we wanted to ask ourselves, basically, what's going on with, it has the, oh, sorry.
Sorry, what about the mic?
I forgot about the mic.
And you won't hear, yeah, it's just for the video, so yeah.
So what we wanted to ask ourselves was what's going on with the dynamics of the teams. So
Technology, eh?
So basically, has it changed recently? So has there been some new additions, like new hires that could be an issue, or somebody that's maybe she was really close to that's current that left recently? So we'd ask ourselves that. Is this typical of her work? So has she had past errors? And we also wanted to ask, how are we contributing to the situation, depending on our relationship with this employee? So are we going through something that maybe she's responding to or reacting to, or just are we contributing either positively or negatively? And then we want to also ask ourselves, what will the actions be, so we can kind of have a plan in our head how to work through that situation.
Very good, thank you. I really like the one where you're asking yourself, like, what could you be contributing to the situation too? That's not something often people think of, right? Would you like to, you have a couple of questions that you'd like to share with anyone? Want the mic?
Don't make eye contact.
That's all right.
A few of them that came up were the requirements clear and understood beforehand? So trying to find out if that was understood. Does she understand the severity and the implications of the errors, if that ties in? A third one that just came to mind too, accounting background. When somebody becomes more quiet and wants to be independent, could be a sign of potential fraud. So that would be something I'd want to make sure I'm aware of. Always think the best in people, but maybe it opens your eyes to a different avenue to look at.
Right. You never know, right? Thank you.
I guess that kind of ties in with ours legal implications. So with the mistakes that she's making, is it causing such an error throughout the company, or maybe, I don't know, misrepresenting anything? And then maybe when's the last time that we went over conduct with our employees, or specifically her? And then teaching points. So is there anything that we kind of are missing on our part for teaching? So
very good. So since you have the mic, do you mind, what questions would you ask her now? So that's good. You've reflected as a manager. These are some of the things that could be going on. So that would lead into the questions that you could ask. So what are a couple of them that you might ask?
So number one would be clear expectations. So does she know what's expected of her in this role? And if she can maybe cite them to us, or let us know where she can find them to have her review them. If there's something personal going on, so maybe ask, is everything going okay? Is there anything that we can help you with, whether that personal or work life or anything like that?
Very good. Good questions. Yeah. That's why I put that little personal piece in there. There could be, or it could be fraud. I didn't think of that one. That's a good one.
One of the things that we agreed with too is often if somebody's at a performance level and all of a sudden that changes, is there something in your personal life? And it's kind of a balancing act as to how deep can you prod, but I think you can open that opportunity that if they say, yeah, I'm having health issues, or my dad's health has gone downhill, at least you can, are they even aware that's affecting their work? Are they aware of the errors or issues? Did you know you've made these errors on this? Do you understand the implications of it or the consequences that those create? And last one is, what can I do to help you out and resolve this? So rather than just hanging out to dry, I'm here to help out. What can I do?
Very good. Good questions. And I like how what can I do to help? as a coach, that's one tip that I always give people when you're asking these type of questions. Great to start questions with what instead of why. Why puts people on the defensive. So why did you do this? Versus what went wrong this month that caused this to happen? People will be then less defensive and hopefully open up more about what actually happened. Yeah. Okay, good. Excellent. Well, then maybe you can tell us, would you fire her? Would you discipline? What would you do?
Mm-hmm. So I think it really depends on how she responds to the questions that we ask her. But I think we all there was consensus that we would not discipline in this situation, and just making sure that moving forward, we're setting clear objectives.
Exactly. Yeah, expectations are clear. And yeah, from the information you have, it doesn't look like she has had anything like this happen before. She's been a good employee. So if it's a first time, do you guys all agree? Do you think it's a performance issue, right? You have a conversation, you set the clear expectations. But would anybody discipline? Or are we all on the same? Not at this point, right? Exactly, yeah. Some retraining required maybe, or, what resetting those expectations, but.
Well, we thought, we would say we sit back down to the mark and just go and just review.
Perfect, that ongoing, because you've offered the support, but sometimes, people might be reluctant to take you up on it. It's good to have that follow-up. Yeah, good.
We also looked at it more of a verbal warning, but making sure it's documented. Not as a written write-up for it, but making a note what was said and what was discussed on a certain date. So if it does recur, you've got something to refer back to.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. And yeah, just to document. You don't have to call it don't have to call it a verbal warning because it's not really, but that you had the performance conversation is important to document. Since you have the mic, we might as well go on to scenario number 2. So what are you going to say to Tom when you approach him right away when he's taking off his safety glasses and his hard hat again after you just told him to put them on?
A couple notes we had is confront them and ask them simply, why did you just do this again? I was looking for, do you have a good reason? Was it sweat was dripping down my eyes and I had to wipe my head and clean my glasses? Or do you just not have a good excuse this time? And then secondly is, do you understand why this is important? It's the safety, the leading by example. If you're asking your staff to do this, yet you don't do it yourself, do you understand the implications of that?
That's right. Yeah, very good. Okay. Anyone else say anything different or anything to add to what you might say?
Yeah, just something I kind of heard of recently. Some of the consequences can be super severe. I think one of our guys or another guy on another crew wasn't wearing his PPE, and I believe the whole crew was kicked off the job site, which could spiral out of control into having to reschedule, missed deadlines, maybe possible penalties, just from one simple action. So, yeah,
absolutely.
So sometimes it's just way more serious than just missed time from work because you got something in your eye and you weren't wearing your PPE. So understanding or maybe setting an example as such as that, just so they understand the consequences or the possible outcome.
Very good. Yeah. And thank you. I'll ask this group. So would discipline be appropriate in this scenario?
I think that it would warrant a verbal warning. I think that it doesn't really tell us here because he has never worked for us before.
Right.
So we would want to check his file just to see if this is the first offense or that kind of thing. But I think definitely a verbal warning would be warranted.
Yeah. Maybe even a written, right, to your point. So that's where you don't have to. Yeah. Yeah, you're writing them up. Here, do you want to tell us more?
No.
No? Just writing them up. Yeah.
I just think the fact that this happened within,
like, how long is he out in the field? And out, you've been there maybe an hour and you've already seen him do it twice. To me, that warrants a written warning. And also we wanted to make note too, like obviously this whole conversation, we're wanting to pull him aside. We're not doing this in front of the whole crew. And just let him know that it is a written warning. And if it happens again, it could lead to heavier disciplinary action.
Exactly.
Something you could add on it too is making clear that it's his choice, what the next steps are. That if you choose to do this again, then our decision's already made for it. You've made the decision for us.
Right.
That it's not us bringing the hammer down, it's their behavior that's driving the consequences.
Yeah. Go for it. Like, seriously.
Well, we wanted to either write him up because it was like a direct, insubordination. So I think a written, possibly suspension, depending on what his answer would be of why he took it off.
Yeah. Does he give you attitude? Like, there's so many factors, right?
Yeah.
And remember, and you wouldn't have to give the discipline right there and then. I mean, you're gonna, like you said, write them up. They might be unionized. If they're unionized, you're gonna have the right to have the union rep there to have the conversation. And then you say this, then you go away and you look at all the situation, and it could be a suspension. And then you don't know what the past record has been for this employee too. Maybe they had a written warning, so that's not in here. So we don't know for sure. You just haven't worked for you. You don't know what's happened. So, yeah.
Just playing the devil's advocate, we asked ourselves, what did you do? This would be a question I would ask them. What would you do at your other work site if it's the first time with us?
Right.
If he says, oh, we didn't have to wear them, then I would be questioning my company and our goals and our policies.
They're not consistent then.
They're not consistent throughout. How can you discipline somebody if he doesn't take you serious because the rest of the company isn't doing it either?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it could be as much a management or a company-wide problem as an individual.
Yeah. Good point. So there's some follow-ups there that would need to have, which is perfect lead into workplace investigations, because that's what you'd have to investigate and follow up on some of these things. They might say, well, we didn't wear them in the other. Well, he might be lying too, right? You might follow up with the other manager and, oh, yes, we did. And, but they didn't enforce it. Or, there's going to be a lot of sometimes excuses for not doing it. But safety, you can't compromise safety. And you're right, like the bigger companies, they've got their own standards. And if you're a contractor and you're not following the safety rules, they're not going to take any. I'm sure you've seen this many times, right? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the discussion. And I just have to find my clicker here. So this is a good lead into workplace investigations. But before we go on, how did we do with the objectives? Did we touch upon, what about a more inspiring culture? That was yours, right? Do you think putting some of these processes or into place, having a code of conduct, supporting, one another and setting clear objectives, do you think that could inspire a more engaged workforce? Yep. Sure. Exactly. Yeah. And generally, that's what employees want, right? They want that consistency. They want to see that, and they'll take pride in that. If everybody is being consistent and building this positive culture. So, yeah, setting up a good evaluation. I think that was yours. Did we kind of talk about just setting some of those objectives up front and being really clear about expectations? Good. Okay.